So, Eric, there
Okay,
is a little story that you tell about yourself, what you do, that I like very much, and maybe I'd like to invite you to share it.
sure. Well, it's a parable that I use as a way of starting my podcast, and it's usually known as the parable of two wolves, or there's a couple different names for it. Nobody really knows where it comes from. I've heard it variously attributed to the Cherokee Indians and also to Billy Graham. So who knows? Um, I still think it's a great story, and it goes like this. There's a grandfather who's talking with his grandson. He says, in life, there are two wolves inside of us that are always at battle. One is a good wolf, which represents things like kindness and bravery and love, and the other is a bad wolf, which represents things like greed and hatred and fear. And the grandson stops, and he thinks about it for a second, and he looks over and he looks up at his grandfather, and he says, well, grandfather, which one wins? And the grandfather quietly replies, the one you feed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So that's the parable, and I kick my show off by reading that parable and asking my guests what that parable means to them in their life and in the work that they do.
So, would it be okay to turn the tables on you and maybe ask you what it means to you in your life? And
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Well, I think that the thing about a parable is that usually a parable becomes a parable because it conveys a lot of information very quickly and very simply, and you kind of just get it. So on one hand, the parable it feels very obvious, right? It's about the choices we make in our life, where we spend our time, where we spend our attention, where we put our focus, our thoughts, our energy. And so on one level, it's very straightforward. On a more subtle level, though, I think the parable speaks to me in a couple of different ways. One of the things I like about it is that it describes that everyone has this battle going on inside of them, and that it sort of sounds like the battle's pretty close.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And what I like about that is I think it normalizes the human experience that, what, we are all going to have good days and we're going to have bad days, and we're going to have times that we're kinder and times that we're less kind and times maybe that we're greedy, and I think it normalizes being human to me. And it just sort of, when that happens, it's not pathological. It's not sick. It's just what being a human is. So that's one of the things I really like about the parable. And then the other thing I like about it is it doesn't talk about starving the bad wolf or going after the bad wolf with a shotgun or having to kill it or cage it. It just talks about, giving a little bit more attention to the good wolf. And I think that really opens up the idea that, the negative emotions in our lives and the things that we might call negative emotions or our bad wolf are also a part of us that need, that could use attention, and we don't have to try and, in the process of becoming better people, try and kill off the things that we might see as bad in ourselves. So it feels more real to me. I think it stays away from, being too positive thinking, like everything has to be positive. Don't ever have a negative emotion or don't ever feel bad, because I don't think that's healthy. So that's kind of what the parable means, to me, and why I like it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I love that, and I really can resonate with that notion of, not trying so hard to kill the bad wolf, but really it's there. And
Mm-hmm.
what I also like very much about it is that, unlike the story of, the typical cartoony thing about the devil and the little angel sitting on the shoulders, what's happening in that
Mm-hmm.
story of the devil and the angel is that you're in a way a pawn between the forces of good and evil, and they fight, over the territory. But the relationship is reversed in that story because it's in a way, the good and evil, if you want, are there, and they're always going to be there. But it's about the choices you make moment by moment with them. And so that also changes the balance of, where instead of being the passive battlefield, you are actually pretty much playing with what's happening.
Yeah, I'd never thought of that. I really like that it's not external forces. It's internal. And I like that. One of the things I always think is an interesting dichotomy. I've been very influenced by a lot of Buddhist teaching. I can tell, I think you've at least been influenced, mindfulness is a big part of the work that you do. And yet grew up in a Christian culture. And those two, Buddhism tends to say we're born good. Underneath everything, we are beautiful and perfect. And Christianity sort of tends to say original sin, you're born bad. And I don't find either of those stories to resonate with me. I actually think we have the seeds of all that stuff inside of us, which is kind of why I like the parable also. It just sort of paints what feels to me like a truly accurate picture, which is we're not either of those things. It really is about what seeds we choose to nurture and, what weeds we choose to pull and then that sort of thing.
Yeah. So in a way, the sense that we have all the options. The same way that, say, as a kid, you have a lot of connections and in the nervous system, in the brain, and then the ones that survive are the ones we use. And so again, that's a notion of having all this potential, and we fashion our lives as we live it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, what I also like in the parable is that it's not just in a way told as we have these two wolves, but it's told in the context of there is a grandfather and a grandson, and so it's also the context of tell me a story, and the context of the wide-eyed little child who loves being told stories, and the relationship that exists between father and son or grandfather and son, between storyteller and audience, and also about that bond. And so it's about the story, and it's about, if you want, communicating a wisdom about the world. But it's also within a context of that love and that bond of, literally transmitting experience, but in a loving way. That feels very nice.
It's another interpretation I had never thought about, but I like that. I like that idea a lot. And I think one of the things that I personally have learned from the show the most is probably how important that connection to other people is. I think that when I went into the show, I tended to think a lot about, and I think maybe it comes from thinking about meditation a lot or thinking about psychoanalysis. But I sort of thought that the path to a good life and all that was by going inward and knowing myself. And so that's certainly, there's a lot of truth in that. What I think that I didn't realize, and I think what the show has taught me a lot, is that in addition to that, it's also very much about the connections and the relationships we have outside of us. It's both. It's both going inwards and it's about connecting outwards. And I think that connecting outwards is the part that you just sort of referenced in the parable, and the part that I think I probably personally have learned the most from on the show is how important that is, and that I need to nurture that in addition to my inner life.
Right. I mean, otherwise it would be a desert, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. So that sense of connection, and so a very important part of your life is this show, is this connection, is this talking with people and communicating with people. So what's the sense of it? In a way, as you reflect on it. I don't mean sense in a sense of sense, like does it make sense, or a logical sense. I mean, what's the felt sense, the emotional sense, if you want, about adding that dimension in your life.
Yeah. It's been wonderful. It's certainly one of the best things I've ever done for myself. It's enriched my life in many ways. I mean, I started the show fairly modestly with two main goals. My one goal was that I felt like I needed it. I felt like I needed the constant reminder about what, to look at what wolf I'm feeding. I needed the reminder to be intentional and conscious in my life. Because I have a forgetter. I mean, I forget easy. I mean, I can learn a lesson 100 times and 2 days later need to be reminded of those things. So the show for me was a way to build into my life, thinking about these things. I thought, well, if I talk to somebody every week, then there's going to be that. But then I'm going to prepare for those talks. So I'm going to be reading those books. My life is going to have this, this at the heart of it. And so that was goal one. And then goal two was, my best friend, Chris, does the audio for the show. And I honestly just thought it would give us a chance to spend a lot more time together because we were both adults and we didn't see a lot of each other. And he's one of the great joys of my life. And so, the show for me was if I could accomplish those two things, and those have been accomplished many times over, what I was, certainly hopeful might happen, but wasn't really necessarily expecting was that so many people would love and resonate with the show, and I would, some of the letters, emails that I get from people really kind of, they kind of blow me away at how people describe how transformative the show has been to them, and that's, I think I still, it still takes some getting used to, but I love it. I mean, it obviously feels really good. I spend, I think on the show I'm pretty open about my struggles with addiction and with depression and just with how to live in this world. And so it's really, I think true healing from those sort of things happens when we're able to take these experiences that are difficult and they become helpful to somebody else. That to me feels like, I feel like I continue to heal those parts of myself by doing the show. So, my felt sense of it is just really joy. I'm so happy with it.
So it's a sense of joy and healing and expansion.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It's wonderful.
And so what you're describing is that, in a way, doing the show is some kind of a mindful practice for you, or some kind of some way of setting up a sort of routine in a good way.
Yes.
Where the routine takes over and frames a setting in which it helps you do what you might otherwise not have a chance to do, which is to reflect inside, to connect with people, and to explore some topics that otherwise you may simply not find the time for.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had learned enough, before starting the show about, trying to design your life in a way that the things that are good for you, you just kind of stumble over them, right? It's like that old idea, like if you want to ride your bike more, put your bike right by the front door. It was sort of this similar idea was, it was a lifestyle design to say, this is going to sort of make me do this. It's going to create a routine, and it really has. I mean, every Tuesday night, a show goes out, and there's a whole routine, that goes into having to get, everything that has to get done to get that out that time every week. And it has created for me a very stable routine. And I think I learned in recovering from addiction, as much as I might think I don't like routine, it's incredibly good for me.
Yeah. So there's, in a way, that sense of excitement is what wants to break away from routine.
Right.
And routine is quote unquote boring. But there is something in routine that gives you also a ground for nurturing stuff and for coming back to a certain place.
Yeah, I mean, I think routine can be considered a negative thing, but for me, done correctly, it's been a big part of what I think has made my life much better. It used correctly, it's a very powerful tool for me.
Yeah, which is why
I need it.
I'm tempted to call it, practice as opposed to routine.
Yeah.
To avoid the negative connotations of routine. But it's nice to also point out that, it depends which way you look at it.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Yeah. And so, as you have installed this practice, this routine or this practice in your life, that, how has it changed affected your life? Your day job, your other
Yeah.
activities.
I mean, it hasn't. I mean, the show's been from a numbers perspective has been pretty successful. I think we've been listened to like 3.5 million times. So it has affected, but it's not affected enough that like I've quit my day job or that I don't do some of the work that I used to do, which is e-commerce consulting type work. And I still do some of that, although I'm able to do a little bit less of it because of the show, and I'm progressively moving in that direction. I think that, it's created that routine. It's connected me with lots of other people. It's kept me sort of with inspiring thoughts and ideas in my head on a really regular basis. And I think it's done another thing for me, which is that I think it has helped me it's helped me to take the practices that we talk about in the show and do them more regularly. And some of it is not, I don't position the show as like I'm this expert teaching all these people these things. Yet I do feel a little bit of, when I look at, the things we talk about as being unimportant on the show, there's been a little bit of me that has thought, you know what, I should live up to these ideals. I should, so it's made, so for example, it was when I started thinking about doing the show and planning for it, was the first time that I really got to a daily meditation practice that I've now been doing for 3 years. I mean, the 20 years prior to that was on again, off again, on again, off again. But I think that some of the discipline of the show and the wanting to really practice what I was talking about helped me to make, that's been a really big positive change for me, is that daily practice. So I think it has provided, a structure, and I think the repeated, hearing of these ideas and these concepts and the repeated conversation about what living a good life looks like has really sort of seeped into me more than it did in the past. I think that part of it that I hoped would happen has happened.
So in a way, as we're talking about this, we're talking about an instance of, feeding the good wolf, that in a way, that sense of, okay, it's going to happen. It's not by giving the wolf a one-time feast and then famine the rest of the time, but it's about creating a regular diet. And so that sense of, how am I going to nurture that part of me that I want to be nurtured, not through willpower, not through enormous struggle each time, but by creating a structure in my life, so that these things become, in a way, more normal and harder to avoid, not from a sense of obligation, but, like not an opportunity also to not do it. So that sense of establishing the structure that makes it possible to be the person you want to be.
Yeah, and that's a big theme of the show that comes up, has come up an awful lot, is around, call it what you want, call it habit change or behavior change, or creating good routines, or practice. We focus a lot on that on the show, and the lessons of how to do that have been very sort of consistent across, and it's around, starting small, and building, starting very small, achieving success, feeling good about that success, and then building. I mean, that's how I finally got to a daily meditation practice. I mean, over all the years, what would happen is I would meditate for a little while, then I would quit. And then I would pick up a book and I would read about it and think, God, I really should be meditating. Look at all those great things. And they would say, meditate for 30 minutes. So I would meditate for 30 minutes and I would do it a few times. But 30 minutes of meditating for me was like 30 minutes of running fast if you don't jog. It was hard. And so what I did this time is I just started at 2 minutes. And then the next week I went to 3, and then I went to 4, and before you know it, it's, 20, 30 minutes a day. And I've just learned it, both myself and with a lot of the people that I've been working with through the show, the coaching work I do, how powerful that tool of starting really small and just slowly building that habit until it is part of your life. What a good way that is to make lasting change in life.
Yeah. So really, it's like the give it time to grow. So the organic model that the tree doesn't become a tree from day one. There's a very slow growth in that
Yeah.
before that little seed becomes a tree.
Yeah, and I like the tree or the plant analogy a lot because you're right, it doesn't happen overnight. And the other thing that the other extension of that analogy that has helped me is to think of habits as like a tree or a plant. And I think one of the big things that I've learned through this process of really being able to change behavior is that life is, whatever plan I come up with, life is going to come along and just throw it into disarray. So if I plan to work out for 30 minutes every morning before I go to work, there are going to be days that is not going to happen. A kid is going to be sick. A car is not going to start. A dog is going to need, dog's going to run away and I'm going to have to go find it. This is going to happen. And so what I've realized is that at the same time having a routine, but also having a lot of flexibility around that routine is really helpful. And so in times like that, what I've sort of, the way the plan analogy helps me is that when life gets really difficult or challenging, sometimes my goal is just not to kill the tree during those periods, right? Like I'm going to do enough of the habit. We had a guest on, James Clear, who said what was one of the more transformative lines for me about how to keep things going, which was reduce the scope, stick to the schedule. So, what that means is if I plan to go to the gym for 30 minutes and I can't, I'll still go for 5. I will go into the gym and work out for 5 minutes. And 5 minutes, we all know, is probably not transformative in the grand sense of my health. But that 5 minutes of continuing to do it, of continuing to keep the tree alive, is truly transformative in the ability to keep that behavior constant. Because what I witnessed in so many people and in myself for so long was, you're doing really good, then I miss 2 or 3 days, and it's very easy to go, see, I screwed up. I never am any good at this, and just quit.
Right.
We get derailed, and thinking of this as something that I want to do for the long term, and thinking of keeping that tree alive and of reducing the scope and sticking to the schedule. Those are the things that have allowed me to go from being a periodic meditator to a daily meditator, or somebody who would exercise for periods of time, quit for long periods of time, to the point where I've been, pretty much very consistent for 3 years. Those are the principles that have helped, and that's why I like that tree analogy a lot.
And so in a way, the 5 minutes of exercise is not going to have any aerobic effect or any strength building effect. You're right. I mean, it's not going to do that. But what it is it's a reinforcement of, I'm able to keep my habits. I'm able to stick to this. And I make do with circumstances. So in a way, instead of the big tree, it's a little bit more like the reed, the reed is going to bend with the wind as opposed to being so rigid that it breaks down. So all kinds of stuff is going to happen. And as the reed, I'm going to bend, but I'm going to continue being there.
So an example of this being flexible while trying to keep, routine or habit is, one of my clients is a large retailer, and the work that I do for them is in their logistics center. And so it's about 1 million square foot building. And so when I'm traveling, it's hard for me with the show and everything else I have to do to necessarily exercise the way I would at home. But what I can do is, if I structure my day in such a way and I'm conscious of it, I can walk about 5 miles a day within this giant building, just going about the things that I need to do. So that's an example of how I'm flexible. I'm going to exercise every day. That's my commitment to myself and my routine. But that's an example of being flexible. It's maybe not the exercise I would do at home, but I still can feel like, 5 miles of walking is still, I've kept that habit alive of I exercise every day. And yet I've done it in a way that works within my life. Whereas if what I was trying to do was I had to carve out 45 minutes or an hour, on the treadmill, that would be a lot harder. And so there are opportunities to find things like that allow us to keep our habits and these good behaviors going within the context of our lives while still achieving some flexibility. And that flexibility is what I found important, at least for me, because routine, like, I am in a lot of different places a lot of different times. And so it's very hard for me to have the same routine every day. And so learning to be flexible but keep going has been important for me
Right. But
in
so
doing
so
these things.
interesting. I like when you put it this way, because in a way, what it's about is, of course, it's about flexibility, but it's also maybe in a way about the idea that there's not total flexibility. There's a sense of what's important, a sense of priority. It's not total flexibility in the sense of, today I don't want to exercise, I'm lazy, or I can't, I won't.
Right.
But that's a sense of holding on to some priorities that are going to be actually very important. And so maybe we come back to that notion of intentionality, of which
Mm-hmm.
wolf to feed. Because it would be very easy in the course of the various distractions that we have in our lives to actually get carried by the waves.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that says, okay, so the winds or the waves are going to carry me left and right, but I know where I'm going, like in a sailboat where you need to tack left and right, but you have a sense of your direction. And so that's very implicit in what you're saying there.
Yeah, I think very much so. It's trying to find a way to do these things that I know that are good for me consistently and over the long term. And I've had to sort of play with that a little bit until I found what worked for me and worked with my life. But the underlying intention was always there. For me has been, I'm going to try and exercise, 5 or 6 days a week. That's just a core intention for me. And I do it largely because I do it as a mental health exercise more than anything else. I mean, exercise to me, I know it's good for my body. I know it helps me to look better. But for me, it's one of the core pillars that supports my mental health.
Right. And so in a way, a core pillar of your life is a focus on mental health, is not taking it for granted, is in a way being aware that it cannot be taken for granted and that you have to do something because it's very valuable to you.
Yeah, in my case, yeah, I can't take it for granted because I will slip into depression relatively easy. And my experience has been if I slip too far in that direction, then, addiction could be back around the corner. So I think I was driven to some of these things kind of under the threat of, total destruction.
Mm-hmm.
But those things have turned out to be wonderful things for my overall life. But exercise is just one of those things for me. If I don't do it for a few days, I start really not feeling very good in my body and in my head. I just feel off and I start to feel depressed and lethargic. And so I don't think it's that way for everybody necessarily, but for me, it's a big lever in
And
that.
so it's also connecting to that felt sense experience of feeling off or not feeling off. Because in a way, one, as many of us are, could be cut off from that felt sense experience, could be off without noticing that we're off.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes a certain mindfulness, a certain self-awareness, and something also that is cultivated, to be able to have that communication with the inside signal that says, what's happening right now is I'm off. And so there's something that I can notice and I can do about it.
Yep, absolutely. And yeah, I agree 100%. I think that's at the heart of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, as I'm listening to you and I'm reflecting, I certainly resonate with a lot of what you said, that idea of, that sense of feeling when you're off, of doing something about it, of what's important to you, of, and that constant, in a way, experimentation to be who you want to be, and the pleasure, the great satisfaction in sharing it with people, but that added benefit that actually in sharing it, it helps reinforce, the message, to yourself as you do that. So there's a sense, in a way, of not just you doing it in isolation, but being part of something which helps people do the same thing in their life and also do the same thing in terms of spreading the word to others.
Yeah, hopefully it's a virtuous circle of some sort. It certainly helps me. I think there's that old saying, you teach what you need to learn a lot of times. And so that's certainly true of me.
So it sounds like maybe a good place to end, to kind of repeat that in a way as a sense of, that there is something very nice about, I would almost want to reverse it, you teach what you need to learn. So in a way, if you need to learn something, maybe start with the idea of teaching it, not to be a hypocrite, not to fake it, to pretend you know it, but in a way to give you an incentive to become better and better at it, and to create a setting in which you can reinforce that habit in yourself as you communicate to people how valuable it is.
Yeah, I mean, there a couple of things there. One is there's certainly studies that show the best way to learn something is if you have to turn around and teach it. And then one of my favorite books of all time is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And he says very much in the beginning, you'll get a lot more out of this book if you try and, teach and explain some of these concepts to the people around you. And that's always been, so I think just that's been a way I have sort of seen and approached the world, is that I certainly will learn more by teaching it. And like you said, I think it's the spirit of doing that is important. It's the spirit of I'm learning this too, and I want to share it with you, versus I'm the expert and let me tell you how it should be done. I mean, nobody receives that very well, but I think if you have the right spirit, teaching as you learn is very powerful way to learn something and have it stick.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
This is part of the Active Pause podcast at activepause.com.
It, you teach what you need to learn. So in a way, if you need to learn something, maybe start with the idea of teaching it, not to be a hypocrite, not to fake it, to pretend you know it, but in a way to give you an incentive to become better and better at it, and to create a setting in which you can reinforce that habit in yourself as you communicate to people how valuable it is.
Yeah, I mean, there a couple of things there. One is there's certainly studies that show the best way to learn something is if you have to turn around and teach it. And then one of my favorite books of all time is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And he says very much in the beginning, you'll get a lot more out of this book if you try and, teach and explain some of these concepts to the people around you. And that's always been, so I think just that's been a way I have sort of seen and approached the world, is that I certainly will learn more by teaching it. And like you said, I think it's the spirit of doing that is important. It's the spirit of I'm learning this too, and I want to share it with you, versus I'm the expert and let me tell you how it should be done. I mean, nobody receives that very well, but I think if you have the right spirit, teaching as you learn is very powerful way to learn something and have it stick.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
This is part of the Active Pause podcast at activepause.com.